Color might be one of the most important parts of solidifying your signature style. Using the same palette throughout your body of work will by default have a strong cohesive look. It also allows you the flexibility when it comes to experimenting with different medium. If you want to try a new technique, for example, but still keep using the same palette, this can still come across as your signature look. One of the best ways to finding your palette is to create a Pinterest board and pin like crazy all the things that you are naturally attracted to. So I recommend to go ahead and create a Pinterest board and call it My Colors or Colors I Love, and then spend 1 to 2 hours pinning images that you are drawn to based on the color palette. It can be artwork, it can be homeware, even decor. It doesn't have to be actual artwork. It can literally be anything. Allow yourself the freedom to get lost in the experience and just pin without thinking. So don't analyze or judge. There's going to be plenty of time to refine later. So once you've done that, you're going to move on to analyzing your choices. And I've created a section in the workbook to help you with that. So it's super important to create your Pinterest board first before moving on to the workbook. So go ahead and pause this video, create your board, and then complete the color story section on page 5 and 6, and I'll see you back here. Now that you've done the exercises, you should be getting a clearer idea of your color preferences. The next step is to choose 15 to 20 colors that will represent your core palette. It might feel a little limiting to only choose 15 to 20 colors, but this will serve as your base and you can still use tint variations of your base colors in your work. For example, I have aqua blue in my palette, and I often use slight changes in the hue and the tint of that aqua color. But having aqua in my core palette guides me in my initial choice to include that color in my artwork, as opposed to, for example, a violet blue. There are further guidelines to consider when choosing your core colors, and that might feel even more restrictive, but remember, we want to create perimeters to help establish a signature look. The reduced palette is just a starting point that you can expand on. Here's some guidelines to refining your core palette and what it should include. You should have analogous colors. These are the colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel, and they are similar in hue, and it creates cohesion throughout your palette. You definitely want some complementary colors. These are kind of like the accents in your palette, and it brings your palette to life. So these will be opposite each other on the color wheel. It doesn't have to be directly opposite each other, but in that kind of vicinity is a good starting point. Your palette should include a variety of tones. So what that means is, imagine if you turned one of your illustrations to black and white, you still want to be able to see good definition and variation in the tonal value throughout the piece. And then finally, you can't have a palette without neutrals. These are kind of like your grounding colors, and they are great for filling space and making your principal colors shine. I highly recommend spending quality time on this section because these colors will play a key role in your signature look. I've provided a template to help you record your signature palette, or of course you're welcome to use and create your own. I recommend importing the template into your preferred software so that you can add your colors. You'll find a JPEG version of the template in the class resources. You'll notice that I included an example palette in the workbook. I was kind of reluctant to do that because I didn't want to influence your choices. That's why it's super important that you create your Pinterest board first before working through the workbook. I wanted to include this palette because I know so many people struggle to get started or understand what a cohesive palette should include. Let's take a closer look at it. Here we have a 15 core color palette. You'll see it includes a variety of tone and some complementary colors as well as neutrals. So if we have a closer look at those, each of those areas, you'll see how our similar colors here will create harmony throughout the palette. It has some good complementary colors. These don't necessarily sit directly opposite in the color wheel, but they are in the vicinity, which is absolutely fine. And of course we have some neutrals which will ground our palette. You'll notice that I used a neutral in this pattern on the page. That's a good example of using that as a grounding color, and your original prime color is popping as the main feature. And then to test the variation in tone, you'll see we have some light, mid-tones and dark colors. I hope this gives you a good example of a cohesive palette and helps you refine your signature palette. I'll see you in the next lesson.